It is Breakout Thursday, which is my favorite day of the week because as part of Your Momentum Now, which I'm also previewing on my personal profile, Breakout Thursday is really the day where you bring your questions, you bring your problems, you bring your challenges and what's going on with you, and we talk about the best ways to deal with them and get into some real training content and what it takes at this point. And so I'll be doing this pretty consistently where I'm the teacher, but as part of Your Momentum Now, we also bring on guest experts. We have our featured experts in the community that'll be answering a lot of these questions. And so we want to make sure that it's super relevant to you and what's going on in your world right now. And so these questions actually came to us today when we were talking about what was the best way to really position yourself and how does that do with branding. And what's interesting is when people bring up the word branding and positioning, I think those two things get confused an awful lot when you're thinking about them, because really there's a big difference between branding and positioning. And in fact, I have a lot of good friends who are actually really big branding experts. And so one of the things actually I want to check right here and make sure as we're getting started that we are live, because my internet connection is acting like it's not super great. So let me see what we got going on right here. Am I good? Okay. Just getting the confirm from everybody out there that's watching, because it's acting like it's dropping for me on my end. It looks like we're on all of them. Make sure, because I see Sharon's with us and I see a couple of people. If you're watching this on my personal, let me know if we're still out there, because I'm recording this if nothing else. Let's see. I don't have my personal profile up, because yeah, it's acting like I'm offline right now. That's interesting. Always exciting. I did this test earlier and it worked fine. That's the sad part. Looks like we're good. So I'm going to keep going. So let's answer the questions. Keep rolling from here. So the first question that was asked was, what is a brand specifically? So again, I have experts I'm going to bring on to talk about this, because this is a specialty for a lot of people. Branding is a career path for a lot of people who do this. It's something that you can spend your entire life learning how to do at this point. And so let's define it first. So in my definition, my humble definition as an internet marketer, what I want to be clear about is the brand is what speaks for you when you can't speak for yourself. Your brand is what keeps you present in the mind of your audience. So it is the thing that someone can immediately look at and get a feel for whatever it is you do. Your product, your service, your personality, all of those things have to be expressed in a good brand, because the brand is doing the work in the eyes of your customer. It is the first impression that you make to your customer. So your brand can be, especially if you're talking about a personal brand, can be specific to who you are, how you dress, how you talk, your energy when you bring yourself to what you're doing. And then that goes all the way through to how that image is conveyed and everything else you do. So in my world of digital marketing, that's how does your website look? That's how does your copy talk about you? That's how consistent are you in your brand? So how you establish yourself and the trends that are important to you in there. But brand is in many ways the stalwart of your product. It is the thing that's always going to be out there doing the work. When someone sees something, it's distinctively you. So I'm going to give some examples in a minute here, but what makes a good brand? So first of all, it's got to be instantly recognizable. It's got to be something that when they see it, when they see your logo, when they see your image, when they see your content, when they see whatever it is, it's something that's unmistakably you. You know that it's you right away, that it's your thing, that it's from you, that it comes from you. And so it's got to be instantly recognizable. It can't be easily mixed up with anything else either. And again, I'm sure my brand experts out there, Perry, Sammy, people who do this all day, every day, understand that very clearly, that you got to make sure that it's speaking for you when you're not, and it's representing you well. In fact, a lot of us, and I even went through this problem a lot over the past couple of years as I was figuring out how I wanted this momentum thing to flow, that branding isn't something that's easy. Like when your blogging content is going out, or when your Facebook Live is happening, or when how you dress when you show up on stage. All of those things are part of your personal brand. But then the brand at large has to have an image and an identity as well, which again, I know I want to interview on this a little bit in the future. But the reason I'm going this direction is the question that was asked, in my opinion, actually wasn't about branding. We'll get to that in a second. But your brand can't be easily confused. It's got to be instantly recognizable. It's got to speak for you when you can't speak. It's got to be something distinct so it can't look like something else. And so there's a big difference between branding and positioning. So the questions that I was asked and the conversation that Sharon, who's a great member of our community, started bringing up in what we were doing actually had more to do with positioning or being an expert rather than just branding. So let's talk about the difference between those two. Because your position is really how you talk about yourself, or how you sell yourself, or how you market yourself. Those things are distinct as well. And this is why it's easy to get those two things mixed up, because your brand's got to be instantly recognizable, and so does your position. Your positioning starts from the minute that you walk into a room, or don't walk into a room, from the minute you walk onto a stage, or whatever your persona is when you go in there. Your positioning is when you start talking about your products or your services or your offers or the various things that you have available, that it's immediate, that you know right away what your position is and how you stand in the industry. So a position can be established a lot of different ways, but it starts with just how you see yourself, how you talk about yourself, and the specifics about that. Because again, there are people who can be brand new to an industry or brand new to speaking or brand new to events and all of that stuff, who have amazing positioning just because of the way that they come into a room and the way they think about what they have to give and what they have to offer. All of that stuff is super critical. And so positioning is the reason people are going to buy from you. Positioning is also the reason that they're going to pay whatever it is they pay for you. So how you position yourself and your offers is really critical. And so after trust, positioning is really the most important thing that happens in your sales. How you position yourself, how you position your product, how you talk about it, how you put that out in front of people, all of those things really matter, and they really determine what someone's going to pay for what it is that you're doing. And so positioning is also how your customer decides your value. So you decide your own internal value, but really when your customer buys something from you, regardless of what the product or service is, they're really the ones that are deciding your positioning. Now your job is to put that up as high as you can, because again, that's going to determine what it's not even the value that it comes down to, it's do they think you're worth it. It's really the key that you're asking yourself in a positioning conversation. Does your customer see you as being as valuable as you actually are? And so that happens all the time. In fact, it's a question I see, and it's something I see in the industry over and over again. I'll have this conversation with coaching clients or members of the community when they'll say, I bought so-and-so's program, or I was involved in so-and-so's community, and I can't believe they were able to charge so much for what they delivered. Well, that's positioning. They believed they were worth it. They were able to say what they said in the way that they said it. They were able to show up however they showed up, and that, again, the branding aspect has a lot to do with that. But the positioning is really what determined how they were able to position that. So that's why some people can sell a program for $15,000 that does less than what you do for whatever your price is, for $99 or whatever. It's why some people compete on different platforms, but positioning is really what determines the value in the eyes of your customer. And in the end, if you're positioned well, your customer's going to value you very, very highly. You want your customers to think highly of you no matter what business you're in, whether it's products, services, direct sales, doesn't matter what it is. That positioning becomes critical in all of those different things, but your customer really decides it. So you need both. There is a distinction. When you hear those two definitions, I hope you understand the distinction, but I'm going to clarify it even a little bit more here when you're asking those questions. So brand, again, the visual representation, the symbolic representation of what you are, the thing that's instantly recognizable, where positioning, again, is how that's conveyed, how you talk about yourself, the value proposition of what you're doing. Can that be conveyed in a brand? Yes. People that are very good at branding and very good at both of these things, branding and positioning, those things kind of come together seamlessly. But the question, the nature of the question and the conversation we were having is about, how do I talk about myself? How do I talk about myself in my group? How do I make sure that the value is being conveyed in the way that I want it to be conveyed? And eventually, how do I make sure that the people that are involved in what I'm doing actually buy stuff from me? So again, you need both. Positioning is the thing that matters most when we're talking about running something, creating a program, creating a product, selling something. Positioning is really what's going to matter most in there. But let's talk about the difference between both, because I want to look at these. I put a couple of examples together. So when I teach these, I'm not coming in with like a formal presentation or a PowerPoint. For those of you who want the experience of what this is just experience talking. So again, if you're watching out there and you're like, oh, I want to add more to that, or you're an expert in this, I know some of you out there who watch this are experts in it, chime in. Make sure that you're providing your feedback, because again, this is a breakout room. This isn't necessarily a presenter on a stage that's giving you all the content. But let's think about branding versus positioning for both of these things. So when you think about brand, and I brought this example up, the most common example of branding you hear, because they're probably the most successful brand in the world. Let's talk about Apples versus PCs. And if you want to get really specific, you can talk about Apple versus Microsoft, which is an ongoing battle in the industry. So let's look at Apple versus Microsoft from a branding perspective, not even talking about positioning. So when you look at Apple, it's ubiquitous. Their brand is on everything they do. It's actually highlighted on the way that they present their products. So when you see an Apple computer, it's indistinguishably an Apple computer. You know right away because it's featured the way it is on the back. It lights up. It is a status symbol when you turn that on, their brand and the way their brand appears. And they are super controlling over how their brand is placed, over when you can use it. Good example of this, people used to like to give away free iPads and iPods and all sorts of stuff, and people still do that in contests, but Apple started cracking down on it because they didn't like what it was doing to their brand. They are endlessly controlling about their brand. Now you look at PCs, or we'll use Microsoft in particular in this example. There's someone that is still very successful, so not wrong from a positioning standpoint, still very successful in what they do, still matters, but when you think about the visuals, it's changed over the years. You look back at some of their stuff, it's really dated, it's chintzy, it's not really ahead of what it's doing. Branding-wise, they have some work, and in fact, you look at most recent stuff that's come out from Microsoft, like the Surface products and how they brand themselves now. They've gone more in the Apple direction from a branding perspective. Now let's talk about positioning. So Apple's positioning is shown in their pricing. It was also shown in Steve Jobs' presentation skills, but their positioning is they are never going to come into a market and compete on price. In fact, most of the time, they're the most expensive products on the market. And so if you ask yourself, why are they so expensive? Why are they the most expensive products on the market? It doesn't necessarily mean that Apple products are that much better than what PCs have to give. In fact, I always used to argue, because I'm the tech nerd, that for the most part, your PCs were better value. You could build more powerful machines. You could be more flexible with them. I've always been an Android fanboy, so those things are better for what we're doing. But the thing you got to think about is they moved more in that direction from a positioning perspective, so they own the high end of the market. Apple is the luxury car of technology, and they're not afraid to be that. And you see Microsoft, again, inching into that space, emulating it, because they realized that most people saw PCs as the bottom of the barrel. You would have them in your office, you would work on them all day. That was the way that it worked. And so as they started to move in that direction, they made an innovation in their brand, and then they started to move that, or they made an innovation in their technology, and then they started to brand and position themselves a lot differently. And Microsoft, you can argue, has just straight up stolen a lot of stuff from Apple. So difference between the imaging and the positioning. The positioning has more of an impact on how it's sold, how it's presented, the pricing model, all of those things that are in there. And you can see where the difference in between the two brands and how they operated were. Now, they're different companies, so it's not necessarily apple to apple, but just in this conversation, important to remember. Apple to apple, haha, nice pun. So let's talk about Walmart versus Nordstrom. So Walmart versus Nordstrom. From a branding perspective, Walmart, not super strong, not super weak. You know, for me, and again, as a marketer, I pay attention to these things. I pay attention to branding. You know Walmart's name when you see it. Their name is kind of their brand, but they're not necessarily so much concerned with brand. You know that blue is their color because blue's all over everything. But again, not super high on the branding spectrum. You look at Nordstrom, they have, again, even though their name is the brand, and specifically in what they do, it's timeless. The font choice is very specific. The way it stands out screams luxury, and what they've got, like the choice is very solid in their choice of colors and how they design everything. Now let's look at positioning. Walmart is competing from a totally different position than Nordstrom is. Walmart is competing on price, so their positioning is that they've built the business, they've built the network, they've built the infrastructure that's really going to allow them to be maximum on price so that they can compete and always be lower than the next guy. Or they can move into an area and dominate because everyone's expecting that type of value. Whereas Nordstrom, you walk into the store, and for the most part, if you're someone who didn't grow up going to stores like that, which was me, you're probably going to hold your breath a little bit when you look at the price tags and what's going on there. But they have the ability to do that because of their positioning in the market, and also because of the service they provide. So the way they provide service in the store, like personal shoppers, how they help you, all those types of things, again, are part of their positioning. So difference between brand and positioning. I put in Payless versus DSW. So you think of Payless shoes, and if you're not in the US, Payless shoes is kind of a cheap in the mall, in wherever kind of shoe store. DSW a bit more high end, has more high end stuff and that kind of thing. Similar thing. Payless, another business that from a branding perspective, they have a more iconic brand, but it's kind of dated if you look at it, and they made some changes and all that stuff. DSW, again, you can tell by the font choices, you can tell by the way their signs look, you can tell by their advertising a higher end position from a branding perspective. Then you get into positioning, and again, you see where they're competing. Payless is competing from the value position, whereas DSW is the luxury position or the fashionable position. They're different positions that are being shown there. And then I just give a few other examples. I'm not going to spend as much time on them. They were just what I was thinking of when I looked at this post. This is kind of a silly one to me. You look at something like Swatch versus Tag Heuer, which is a luxury watch, for those of you that aren't familiar with watches, that charges thousands of dollars. Again, the Tag Heuer watch, definitely nicer, handcrafted, lots of stuff about it that makes it worth that money. But is it really worth the $10,000 compared to the $10 you would get from a Swatch? Don't they do fundamentally the same thing? Sure. So why can Tag Heuer charge that much more for a watch than Swatch? The positioning is what's really important. Now, the branding, again, Swatch is intentionally, they started retro, they've stayed retro, all those things really critical. And then again, Tag Heuer does have iconic branding as well, but it's if you look at the difference in the logos and the imagery and how those things work, you're seeing the difference between branding and positioning. Sure, the brand does the talking for them. It says a lot about their positioning, but the positioning influenced the brand. The positioning influenced how they look and how they talked about it and how their stores are set up and the colors that they chose and all of those types of things. So again, this really boiled down to the question. You were asking about a Facebook group that you're running right now, and you were trying to say, how do I look more like an expert in my Facebook group? Especially since at this point, one of the things that's happening is that you aren't necessarily selling your own product. You're selling somebody else's product. You're selling a direct sales product that's in there at this point. So that is fine, but what makes you stand out? First of all, that positioning conversation. That's the most critical thing. How you position yourself. Absolutely critical. So you have to decide coming in, first of all, based on your customer, who are you for? And I spend tons of time throughout Your Momentum Now. There are 14 different courses in there that talk about the customer conversation. So if you want to see that, look at Simple Campaign Organizer, look at the Facebook Ads course that's part of the membership right now. Look at that stuff where we're going to spend tons of time talking about your customer. In this case, I'm going to assume you know a little bit about your customer, and you're going to have to assume then some positioning conversation about how you talk to them. So for the most part, more than anything, you've got to establish yourself as an authority. No matter what, in any of these places, you've got to establish yourself as an authority. Now, an authority to different people looks like different things. To be very authoritative in the mommy market versus being very authoritative in the business market can be very different things. And how you position yourself and your choice of colors and your choice of the things that you do, depending on the market you're trying to reach, really makes a big difference. But what makes them drawn to you more than anything else? How you position yourself. And positioning at this point, really, really important to say, all right, I understand that how I'm coming into this market is I'm looking at it, am I coming in, what am I competing on? Or what am I bringing in that's unique to me that I can bring in as my positioning? And all of us have positioning that we can bring into what we do, whether it's ours or someone else's product that we're talking about, that's unique. And I would say that's experience. So positioning and experience go hand in hand. If you have stories, if you have firsthand knowledge, or even if you have expertise in the field, that experience gives you a unique positioning, whatever it is. So if you're going into that mommy market and you're a mom, you already have some authoritative positioning. You have the experience. So you can rely on that for your positioning. And then how you talk about yourself from there depends on your customer and all of those things that are important. But at this point, the three things that I would want to bring up that are the three most critical factors in here is what? Oh, okay. So, sorry about that. I'm getting notes on what happened, that one of our Facebook Lives went down a little bit. So I think we're back now. Oh, no, we're not. We're still here in the group, so I'm just going to keep going since it's there. So, again, the three factors that matter the most in this conversation is positioning, consistency, and follow-up. And I divide consistency and follow-up, even though consistency and follow-up are critical together. They really go together. Follow-up could be bundled into consistency, but it's so important that I want it to be noted independently at this point to say, first of all, your positioning, how much you say you're worth and how much you convey your worth really matters. And then how consistent you are about conveying that message so that message doesn't change. When I Google you or when I go to your group or when I buy your product or when I do what I do, that positioning is the same throughout the entire process. That really matters. And then from there, how you follow up. So the follow-up system that exists behind it, that's reaffirming that positioning, that's reaffirming that brand, that's reaffirming all of the things that you've got going out there. And then I put some other questions in here. How does that get reaffirmed in color? For those of you who are interested in that, color theory, a huge thing to be looking at as far as what the colors mean and what they convey. You know, looking at the difference between like a red and a blue makes a lot of difference. And I don't claim to be a huge expert in it. I've read on it a lot, and I made choices based on those things that I've read. And I will definitely recommend some articles and some material, and I'll pull in on our branding experts to talk a bit more about stuff like that, because it does matter. The colors do make a big difference coming in. But then all of this stuff comes back to who it's for. And then there's one other thing that I wanted to touch on in here that is pretty important, because when you were asking about branding and positioning and all those things, there's two things that matter in branding. First, talking about your personal brand and your expert brand really matters. But then you've also got the company brand, the brand that exists and how the company represents itself when you're not around, which all of us over time, if we want to scale a business, need to have some focus on that company brand. It really does make a difference to say, all right, that we want our businesses to live on beyond us, or to have teammates be able to step in, or have partners be able to step in and help and do those types of things for us as we're going through the process. So all that matters, and you want to make sure that you're considering both your personal brand and your overall brand, or your company brand, as I called it here. So how does branding work if you're selling somebody else's product, which was really the core of this process? So it's not necessarily about building a brand in this conversation. It's about positioning. It's about positioning yourself through experience, positioning yourself with conversation and focus, and positioning yourself to show that you are an expert in the field and that you are trustworthy to be talking about whatever it is that you're talking about. In your case, I know that you are specifically talking about non-toxic ingredients, and you're talking about products that are clean and green and healthy and don't have those effects in the system. So for you, I also understand, since it's not your product, you don't want to speak from the position like you developed the thing. You don't want to be the person that's talking like the scientist that's pulling all the data, all of that stuff. You're going to have to rely on your positioning heavily on your experience. Now, the thing about this experience is it doesn't just necessarily have to be the experience that you have in the business. This is something else. You may have other credibility, other credentials, other things that drove you to that, stories that are really important in the things that you're doing that are related to why you chose that product, or why you chose that business, or why you went down that line. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the product or service is. The reason they buy is their relationship relationship with you and how well you establish that positioning. So doing that in a group setting, it's all the same rules. They're still in the group because they want to know you and they want to know the community that you're bringing and how all those things relate to what you're doing. So you have to make sure that there's plenty of you in that community and how that's all conveyed. And so that's really critical. They're still working with you. You still have the relationship and you still need the positioning, and they're expecting you to be the expert. Now, here's the fun thing about being the expert. Just because you don't have the scientific expertise, or just because you don't have the product development expertise, or just because whatever expertise it is that you're lacking or that you need more of in your business, I don't really care what it is at this point. Whatever that expertise is, you really want to be thinking at this point to say, all right, they're doing business with you. It's your job to establish a position. It's your job for your position to be reflected in your brand, in your group, in your imagery. And that position is based on your experience. It's based on your expertise. And then if you're missing critical pieces of expertise at this point, all you need to do is go get it. So you can interview it. Like that's what I'm doing here in Your Momentum Now. In this community, I'm interviewing it at this point. So I'm not necessarily the best direct sales expert in the world. I know marketing and I know small business, and I've worked with thousands of direct sales professionals over the years to teach them how to make money, to how to make sales, to how to do what they want. I've done that over the years through events. But I also said, look, I'm not the systems guy. I'm not the person that's built the companies. I know lots and lots of people who very, very successfully built teams. So I go out and I get the expert and I bring that expertise in because my positioning is great. I don't have to be the expert on everything. We're talking about community here. I don't necessarily want to be the expert on everything. I want you guys who are experts out here in what you know to be those experts and to take that position. So again, the positioning is crucial. And so the positioning comes first in this conversation. So what you're thinking about at this point is really asking yourself the question, how do you position yourself to this group? Not necessarily reflective of your expertise, not necessarily reflective of how long you've been with the company or what you're talking about or any of those things. It's just saying, this is how I'm going to act. This is the expertise and experience that I'm bringing in. This is the position I'm going to assume. I'm competing on what platform based on my audience. So I'm competing on price, or I'm competing on fashion, or I'm competing on the high end, or whatever it is that I'm doing. I get to choose that. And then my customers vote. Does it make sense? Does the imagery make sense? Does the branding make sense? Do all of those things make sense based on what it is that I said I was going to represent at this point? And so there's a big, big difference. And that's really where I wanted to go in this conversation. So I'm going to recap the answers to those questions. So there's a difference between branding and positioning. Positioning needs to come first. And positioning is primarily choice and expertise. It's the choice you make to say, based on the audience that I'm going to, here's how I'm going to present myself. And then my experience, I think I said expertise, I meant to say experience. And then my experience is this. And again, it doesn't have to be direct experience that's related to the thing that we're discussing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be that direct experience. It's okay if it's not, actually. And then your brand is reflective of the positioning choices that you've made. From colors to imagery to websites to everything that you've got in there, it should be consistent. So if your position is folksy or relatable, then your brand should be folksy and relatable. If your position is value, then it should be value. If it's iconic and you want to really make a difference and it's iconic, then be iconic. That's totally okay too. Doesn't matter what your choice is. Those choices influence the brand that you choose and how you position that brand. And so what makes a good brand and really a good position? Instantly recognizable. Somebody has an idea of what it is, even if you're not there pointing at it saying, this is me. And then the positioning, again, comes in at the point of sale of how you value yourself. Big difference between the brands that we talked about. The three factors that make people more drawn to you than other people is positioning, which is what we talked about, number one. Consistency, so that positioning has to be present in everything you do, from imagery to emails to content to whatever, that has to be everywhere. And then follow-up, which is part of consistency, but it's so important to say that once they get familiar with what that position is and once they buy into it, you have to prove to them that you're going to continue to show up in that way. They're going to continue to see your brand. They're going to continue to hear from you. They're going to continue to be aware that you're out there, and you're going to continue that relationship over time. That follow-up is really, really critical. And then your company brand versus your personal brand, revisiting that one more time because it's so important to say your personal brand obviously should be part of a larger brand because you want to be able to bring in other team, bring in other experts, position yourself in the appropriate way. So you do the thing that you do best in the brand, but then there's a company that can exist outside of you specifically having to do everything that you do in the business to make that work. So again, what you're focused on in this conversation and for your group is that position. You have to bring that experience in. You have to start taking that position. You bring in the expertise from whatever sources that you want that reinforce that position. You stay consistent. You stay follow up. That will make a huge difference in your results and in your overall sales as well. And so what I've learned about tonight during tonight's Breakout Thursday, which is always exciting for us to do in this conversation, and we're going to continue this conversation in Your Momentum Now. So for those of you who are curious about what it is and want to know more about it, yourmomentumnow.com, check it out. That is the community. We have questions every day and conversations every day about your business, about your life, about what's going on that we can do to help create results. So this will continue, and I definitely will be bringing on branding experts to talk more about the color stuff, to be talking about the logo stuff, the imagery stuff, all of that. And we do this every Thursday. I don't know if it'll always be at this time. We'll talk about what time it happens going forward. But this is how it starts. So thank you so much. Breakout Thursday, where we answer your questions. You get your specific knowledge. We go out and get what you need from the community to keep you moving forward. Brand versus position. Focus on positioning first. Ken, signing out.